now, Timmy Hartman. You are not alone. I come from a world far from yours. I have journeyed across an ocean of stars to reach you. For some time, your world has sheltered one of my citizens. For reasons unknown, he has chosen to keep his existence a secret from you. He will have made efforts to blend in. He will look like you, but he is not one of you.
Giants of Solomon Islands and their hidden UFO bases, some of the greatest anthropological and scientific discoveries of modern man. Welcome to the SolomonGiants.com. Contained in this website is extraordinary information that brings to the forefront worldwide issues that have been tormenting intellectuals for centuries. It is about two phenomenal discoveries that I have found existing in the Solomon Islands, and this website is a further attempt once again to bring them to the attention of the modern world. The first discovery is about how the people of the Solomon Islands have shared their islands with previously undiscovered to modern world race of hominoids for a millennium right to this very present day. And for a variety of reasons explained, this has not been known by the rest of the world until now. The second discovery is about the whereabouts of hidden UFO bases that I have found existing in the Solomon Islands for quite possibly the same amount of time, and how there seems to be a link between the giants and the extraterrestrials making the Solomon Islands their home. For many reasons, these groundbreaking discoveries have compelled me to share them with the rest of the world. It has always been my sincere hope that hundreds of researchers follow up my work and go into the Solomons to continue on. Science is definitely a progression of new discoveries, and these are some of them. The Solomon Island people named the undiscovered hominoids mention the giants, which is linguistically ironic for the isolated Solomon Islanders, as throughout history, including in the Bible and other prominent books, the same name has been used in other parts of the world to describe these huge, elusive hominoids. To explain some facts about the giant race existing in the Solomon Islands, I will use the giants of Guadalcanal as an example. The giants of Guadalcanal are named as such by the Guadalcanal people, and from my observations they seem to be very similar to the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, Yowie, and such suspected to be found in other parts of the world. At this moment in time, there are hundreds, quite possibly thousands of these giant people, and I use the word people for a reason, living inside the huge tropical rainforest, jungle mountain ranges of Guadalcanal, as the Guadalcanal people will tell you. All claims about the Guadalcanal giants can be supported by the indigenous Guadalcanal people of the island, as it totally plays the major part of their entire grassroots culture, past and present. Apart from being known for building timber-based structures with sheltering sago palm and other leaf, they have vast cave systems running within the majority length of the mountains of this 200 plus kilometer long tropical jungle island. Some of the Guadalcanal giants live in organized lifestyles with social structures, and I have come across many Guadalcanal people that believe they can go from east to west through their cave systems without seeing the light of day, and many believe that their population numbers in the thousands. The Guadalcanal Islanders also believe that there's a huge city of them living inside or underneath the big mountains of the island. Mount Tatuva is definitely one of these cities' main entrances, and if anyone ever wished to film them, the closest villages to Mount Tatuva, where they are also seen regularly, is a good starting point. But that is not required because they are all over the place and are seen on a daily basis somewhere around the island. Actually, I can think of a dozen places around the island, apart from the Mount Tatuva area, that are good starting places for the beginnings of gathering documentary photographic evidence of them. For that matter, I can think of a dozen places around the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu would be the same. Virtually, you can ask anyone from Guadalcanal, and for that matter, the Solomons, if any of their recent ancestors or themselves has had past exchanges with these giants. And one finds a very positive response with many tales supporting their existence. I know for a fact that upon arriving within the Solomon Islands, one can ask the first person they see as to whether the giants can be found there, and they'll start pointing in every direction, and if not, they'll quickly steer you onto someone who will tell you about them. To my understanding, there are 3 different types of species of giants. The larger, more commonly seen, are over 10 feet tall, but I have come across numerous islander accounts with evidence that supports that they grow much taller than that. These giants have very long black, brown, or reddish hair, or a mixture thereof, and when they want to have a good look at you, they'll pull it aside from their face with one hand. They have a protruding double eyebrow, bulging red eyeballs, and a flat, wide nose with a gape wide mouth facial feature, and have an unmistakable odor, which the coastal people will once use as a sign of their presence, depending on the wind. From the large hairy type, they range down in size with reducing amounts of hair on their body. The smaller version, although bigger than normal human beings, are like a wild man living in the jungle and are not as hairy as the big ones. This is the way the Guadalcanal Islanders describe them. Inherently, when they see these smaller half-caste human giants, they make efforts to kill them. These smaller versions are lower down on the giant social order, living predominantly outside their cave systems in the jungle. Although all 3 types are found in the island's jungles, incidentally, there are many news reports, even recently, of these hairy giants in Papua New Guinea. And also, may I say that I know for a fact that the Vanuatu people have also had similar pasts with their giants as the Solomon Islanders have had, as those that follow up on my research will find out. I must point out that the Solomon Islanders, and I suppose the Papua New Guinea and the Vanuatu people, are lacking understanding that their giant races that live with them are something of big news in the scientific community and the rest of the world. Whether by intentional design or not, it is appropriate that the Solomon Islands national logo is the place that time forgot. This is a map of West Guadalcanal showing where a huge population of them can be found on that island. As a rule of thumb, this approximate 1,000 square kilometer area of heavy mountainous jungle of the western section of this half map of Guadalcanal that doesn't have dots or signs of inhabitation are the free territory of the Guadalcanal giants. Although the giants are all over the island, more often than not, the dots seen are merely 2 to 3 villages of huts indicative of interrelated tribal areas. Further, and of significance, is the fact that although land possession is highly regarded by Guadalcanal people and the Solomon Islanders, this 1,000 square kilometer area does not belong to any particular tribe, and there's a good reason for that, which once again can be easily found out by just asking any Guadalcanal person. For those Solomon Islanders seeing this website for the first time, in particular Chosuel and Isabel, please excuse that I didn't put a map of your island on and discuss the similar situations that you have on your island as well. Guadalcanal is rich with gold, a fact that the Europeans discovered centuries ago. 30 years ago, different gold mining companies started negotiating with the traditional landowners with memorandums of understanding in order to capitalize on this gold. A succession of failed attempts followed until these recent years when Ross Mining broke through with a 3% to indigenous deal. In 1998, at the Gold Ridge, central North Guadalcanal, where the mine was being built, they got going with their bigger types of mining bulldozers, pushing in roads, clearing the mine area. The mine borders the Giants' territory, and it would appear that the Giants are quite territorial. On one particular occasion, one of these huge bulldozers broke down with one of the pins on the blade attachment, rendering useless. As it was late in the afternoon, they decided to drop the blade there and take the bulldozer back to the workshop to do repairs overnight, to continue the next day. When they returned the next morning, the blade had disappeared. All the boys became confused. How could such a heavy object vanish? Mind you, we're talking about 10 tons plus. So they started scouting around in the bush looking for it, and happened to notice giant footprints around 3 foot in length. Finally, some 100-odd meters away on a small nearby hill, one of the boys called out, "Here it is." From further footprint investigation, they deduced that the Giants had not carried it there, but had thrown it, or it got there some other way. By the way, this current inoperative gold mine at the Gold Ridge, which from the island's geological reports is small compared to the potential of several other areas, has an estimated 20 billion Australian dollars of gold still remaining there. Some years ago, as I had once been working as a helicopter pilot engineer, I was asked by a boss helicopter pilot of an American fishing fleet that had helicopters to look after their spare parts required, as Australia was closer than Guam was. The job lasted 6 weeks, and I was handsomely paid for my little effort. The office I took was just opposite the old Guadalcanal provincial headquarters, and at lunchtime I would sometimes go across the road and have a few beers there with the then Guadalcanal premier and Victor, the finance minister. It was during one of these lunchtimes that they told me of a giant encounter they had just had some months prior. Both the premier, who is now the national minister, and Victor, who is now the Guadalcanal minister again, had decided to go to the Gold Ridge to survey the area of the proposed gold mine. They took their twin-cab Toyota Hilux mid-afternoon and drove up there. It's quite a drive, and after passing a few villages on the way, they arrived at the mine area. The bulldozer had carved out the road, and as sometimes it rains frequently, the road around the side of the hill became slippery, and they slipped off the road's edge and became bogged in. They made some effort trying to get back up onto the road, but decided to walk back to the last village that they passed and get a bunch of boys to come help them pull it out. Obtaining 30-odd men, they walked back. As they were rounding the last corner to where the four-wheeler was bogged in, they saw the four-wheeler back up on the road with 2 huge giants standing, one in front of the vehicle and the other behind it. Inherently, their first reaction was for all of them to run away screaming in absolute fear. They told me that when they finally got the courage, about a half an hour later, they all returned to find that the giants were gone. Obviously, I asked how tall were they. They told me that the taller of the two was the one that lifted the front of the vehicle up onto the road. And when they inspected the footprints, each had picked the vehicle up by putting one foot on the road and the other near the vehicle. Pointing out the window to a tree, the premier said about that high, which I estimated to be over 15 feet tall, which matched the size of the 3 to 4 footprints that they had described. But you don't have to believe me, just ask them. There are quite a few more stories like that. The Guadalcanal people and many others all know the story of Mango, who passed away 2 years ago. She had been kidnapped by the Giants 50 years ago and spent 25 odd years with them. And like them all, they had given her up for dead until she was found pregnant, hysterically frothing from the mouth in a garden on the northeast coast. A giant had taken her as a wife. When the men realized who she was, they tried capturing her, but because her skin was all slimy as an eel, they found it difficult holding her down. One of the men got an ingenious idea and got some particularly rough-sided leaves, of which they used to hold her down and tie her up with some vines. Understandably, she was mentally unstable for the remainder of her life. But through her pregnancy, she gave birth to a half-caste boy. The bastard boy lived to the age of 5 when one of Mango's brothers slaughtered him. Peter and a few other friends of mine know where he's buried at. Mango is just one of many that this type of thing has happened to. Apes and monkeys cannot breed with Homo sapiens. Where do I think the giants come from? I believe that they are surviving species of hominoids that have branched off well before the Neanderthal man and have developed throughout evolution to be what they are today. The Guadalcanal people also believe that the giants were there before they were. I know for a fact that their gene pool allows them to breed with us, as those that follow up on my research will find out. The Guadalcanal giants are definitely some sort of surviving species of hominoid once closely related to Homo sapiens, as scientists tell us that it is genetically impossible for Homo sapiens to breed with apes and monkeys. Still living today in Guadalcanal and goodness knows where else are crossbred descendants from the giants. Just ask any Guadalcanal person and they'll tell you about them and where they are living. But here are some examples I know of. Apart from the 2 huge, tall, half-caste giant women that can be found living in northeast Guadalcanal, there are half-caste and quarter-caste huge men who have 8-caste children to Guadalcanal women, which are still living today at Tangere of the weather coast of southwest Guadalcanal. Anyone can go see these huge interspecies bred people. Even though Silver died in the early 1990s, Guinea, his son, and his children, some who have bred themselves, are still alive. The huge quarter-caste giant Guinea is renowned by his people in his area for being able to selfishly eat a whole pig by himself, bones and all. DNA samples from the giants and of their crossbred human descendants for analyzing research will be an invaluable tool for many future developments in genetic technology and medical remedies that might still be thought impossible and would unequivocally prove their origins. Further, in 2002, a scientist doctor of the University of Papua New Guinea mapped the DNA of the Melanesian people and found slight differences from that of other Homo sapiens like Europeans, which he said he found bewildering. I would like to speculate that I might have an answer to his bewilderment. It is quite possible that over thousands of years, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islanders, and the Vanuatu people have had their DNA slightly altered because of the occasional sporadic interbreeding from their giant races within their islands. Why are the giants around the world so secretive and universally shy to be seen or known of? As those that follow on from my research will find out, this is not exactly the same case in the Solomon Islands. But I have an answer to this difficult question, which I'll attempt to answer towards the end of this website. But may I say, I'm sure if in the next decade we will find out as to whether I was correct. Just like with Homo sapiens and other hominoids, the Solomon giants are both carnivorous and herbivorous. As most Guadalcanal and some Solomon Islanders will bear testament, these whatever type of hominoid people have until recent history considered the coastal human beings of Guadalcanal and the Solomons to be a reliable source of food, somewhat similar as another meat to be eaten if required. Over the millennia, many thousands of Guadalcanal and Solomon Islander people have lost their lives by being cannibalized by these giants. Hence the reason being the major part of their history and grassroots culture. During my limited research about the existence of the Solomon giants, I found that the giants had actually considered Solomon Islander people like pigs to be eaten. This primitive type of Neanderthal thinking tragically led to coastal children being pinned up into cages and raised to be eaten when they were bigger. There are numerous handed-down folklore and custom stories of where the giants would once storm villages, grabbing people and ripping them limb from limb, eating them right there on the spot. while all ran in complete terror. Also, there are many stories about what they would call the killer giants, who would persistently return to make a meal out of them. Is a record and well-known Guadalcanal folklore custom story of an incident that happened at the weather coast of southwest Guadalcanal, where a village idiot managed to kill 5 killer giant brothers, exacting revenge on behalf of his people, and in return gaining the hand of the paramount chief's daughter, and a few other things. It is my belief that one of the major reasons why the Solomon Islanders and the Vanuatu populations are far smaller than what they should be is because, just as an example, over 5,000 years through which the giants of the islands considering the people as food to be eaten, those people never had the opportunity to breed. Even if it was 50 people a year that were cannibalized, in just only over 5,000 years, then that's 250,000 people that never bred. Unfortunately, the statistics of the giants' cannibalism is far worse than that, as those that follow up on my research will find out. There is one giant who is famously known to the Guadalcanal people for being responsible for taking them off the menu. Ludi Makodi, who is still the chief of the giants, changed the murderous behavior of the giants towards the Guadalcanal people forever in the giant wars of the early 20th century that were fought against the clans that opposed these changes. When you find out the story about how he changed the rest of the giants' attitudes of cannibalizing the Guadalcanal people about a century ago, you will be blown away. It is absolutely amazing, and through my research I have proven it to be true. Although I do not know everything about the Solomon giants, I believe that the giants' cannibalism towards the coastal people and of other larger islands in the Solomon Islands halted for 3 main reasons, and I'll just mention them: the Guadalcanal Giant War, their association with the extraterrestrials inhabiting Guadalcanal, and other islands. How do I know that Ludi Makodi is still alive? Apart from many people telling me that he is, and the fact that the giants are believed to have a far greater longevity than that of Homo sapiens. One of the bishops of Solomon Islands Anglican Church met him in a garden in 2000 to discuss the ethnic war during the Solomon Island tension. How did Ludi Makodi know that the bishop was having a retreat back at his village? Apart from it being on the radio, the only thing I can work out, and it sounds ridiculous to some, there must have been some sort of spiritual component, which apparently the giants have an abundance of. The bishop met Ludi Makodi one more time after that. Just ask him about it, or the Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation, as this was reported on the news around that time. It's a strange place for things like that. I don't know if the giants of Guadalcanal ever had technology before, but they certainly do now. In fact, I know that they have a lighting system within the cave dwellings for at least the past 50 years. There is no obvious light source such as bulbs and lamps, but somehow inside the mountains it is just like daytime, from what the eyewitnesses that have been captured and released have told me. There's a reason why I use the word technology, because other independent credible witnesses have told me of happenings that overwhelmingly support this. Once again, I best not go into it at this moment. It is just good enough to know that they exist. Guadalcanal, Maliita, Choiseul, Isabel, and Makira have literally hundreds of caves and remnants of giant artifacts. And on these islands, anyone can visit many of them. Some giants of old will bury their dead in a similar fashion as Jesus was at first, with a stone rolled across the tomb's entrance. Ezekiel Albua, a once prime minister and the previous Guadalcanal premier, whom asked me to make the giants a reality for him, knows of a burial cave at East Guadalcanal that his father took him to when he was a child. Within that cave there is a perfect, approximately 15-foot giant skeleton laid out. Through unusual circumstances, I never got to see it, but I now know of many more, and so do many others. Just prior to the solemn intention, some Tagara men went to see the giants for advice about what they should do. They did not follow their advice, and so when they went back the second time, as they had not followed their advice, the giants told them that it's all up to them now, and told them to get lost. Surprisingly enough, that was all reported on the Solomon Island Broadcasting Corporation news. When a white man hears such things, and there are plenty of them, for some reason it's always gone straight over their heads, and they haven't even got the least bit curious. Well, I did. Just briefly, you can ask nearly anyone in the Solomon Islands, most certainly the Guadalcanal, about this particular incident. One night, sometime during the 1960s, for some reason, I never found out why, but the giants went through Half-caste and smashed the town to pieces. This is a well-known story of recent Guadalcanal giant history. Mind you, there are plenty. At Christmas 2002, I was sitting on my veranda around lunchtime with my wife and a few others when a couple of men came running up to tell us that a family working in their garden not far away from where we were living near Mount Austin on the outskirts of Half-caste had just seen a huge giant casually wandering along the tall grass of the hillside above their vegetable garden. When we eventually caught up with this family, they told me he made no effort to hide himself during the few minutes he was nonchalantly walking along. They said they noticed that he had actually paused for a moment to pull his hair aside to have another look at them as they were leaving the garden. The Guadalcanal giants and the Malayatin Ramos write language, as those that follow on from me will find out that there are countless ancient stone block walls and stone objects with inscriptions chiseled into them. While I'm mentioning language, a curiosity came across and a theory to it. The Guadalcanal people's language and the Fijian language are very, very close. There are over 100 common words that they both share, meaning that a Guadalcanal person can go to Fiji and speak Fijian within a week, and vice versa. As my good friend and partner Peter Casey found out when he and his music band did a tour over there, the Guadalcanal giants' language is very similar in dialect as to the Guadalcanal people. It is my belief and others that there once was a huge civilization of these giants spread throughout the Southwest Pacific as far away as Fiji and beyond, well before Homo sapien even arrived. I have much evidence about this, too much to put down right now, but I'll touch upon it later. When I briefly get onto the Ramo of Malaita, personally my favorite. Over the centuries, as the giants had an appetite for humans, and that they were easy to catch, the Guadalcanal people instead would offer sacrifices to them, where the giants would come out of the forest to receive them. Although that didn't stop the cannibalism to any great extent, still today there are men that can and sometimes still practice this, like at the village near Mount Tortuga. The pigs have to be white pigs without spots. They include Guadalcanal beetle nut lime, which is ground from freshwater snail shells. Also Guadalcanal custom money, which is 4 or 5 strings together with small shells laced upon a strand length. This also has to be white shell money. Shell money or custom money is the original currency used in the Solomon Islands and still can be used instead of dollars and cents. In a sacred clearing, these are placed, and by methods of calling known to those it was passed down to from generation to generation, and by burning ill bones, which is irresistible to them, the giants soon arrive to take their offering. By the way, the pigs in Guadalcanal, and no doubt a few other places in Melanesia, have learned through evolution not to use any of the giants' trails or tracks, and they don't. In Targarer, a big area southwest of Guadalcanal, some of the giants put barriers across their track entrances to stop the Homo sapiens from inadvertently using them. It is well known that giants do not like fire. possibly because of their long hair. When one is to travel through giant territory, it is advisable to take a pressure pack can with a lighter along just in case. Some months ago, Ezekiel Albua told me of an incident that happened on the Weather Coast, South Guadalcanal in 2000 during their ethnic conflict. 5 Tagara men went hunting pigs with their bow and arrows, and during their hunt they had lost track of time. As it was getting very late and the weather ominously turning into rain, they decided to build a sago palm hut quickly to camp the night. The hut had a roof with sago palm walls. Later that night, with the rain pelting down as they were sitting around a fire within the hut, a huge hand and arm came through the hut's wall. An inquisitive giant had leaned over the hut and was feeling around for what was in the inside. The 5 men started screaming and using sticks from the fire to beat the monstrous hand away. Apparently, they became so horrified that they ran straight through the back wall of the hut into the darkness of the bush. When they found each other the next morning down on the coast, they had been spread out over several kilometers. This brings me to the theory about World War II and the Japanese occupation of Guadalcanal. There's a mysterious reason that has been unsolved as to why the Japanese was not there to initially resist the Allied forces at Red Beach and Henderson Airfield when they first arrived. Interestingly, the Howell-led Australian Intervention Force, in another attempt to emulate the Americans, have heroically used Red Beach again to arrive on. When the Allied forces arrived, they were expecting to lose 1 and 2, but instead there was no one to be found. This was uncharacteristic of the Japanese, and on many of the other island campaigns, they would fight to the very last. Why did such a large force of Japanese flee? I believe I have an answer to that one, and it's not the way history has written it. I believe that the Japanese encountered the giants in the center of the island, and most probably some others, and quite a few lost their lives because the giants and those others would have definitely been on the Guadalcanal people, Solomon Island, or Allied forces side. Circumstantially, in 1999, the Japanese were just about to do a 2,000-strong military exercise, or as they say, in the middle of Guadalcanal, but the ethnic tension stopped that. I find it more than a coincidence that now all of a sudden the Australian government has decided to send 2,000 plus strong military contingent, a little bit of overkill, to the Solomons to only help restore law and order to a little town like Honiara. I'm positive this does not require 2 multi-million-dollar spy planes, a minesweeper, patrol boats, satellite surveillance, 2,000 plus men, and a $300 million a year commitment for 10 years. Although I'm sure at this present time, this initial overseas boost to the economy and stabilizing an economically broke country is much appreciated by most. Apart from the potential very rich fishing industry and sustainable rainforest of the Solomons, there are 6 huge light crude oil and gas basins, just the indispensable basin alone being 2,200 square kilometers. The high concentrated several vast gold deposits of Guadalcanal and those of Choitzul, the large quantities of emeralds, sapphires, rubies, garnets, zirconium, etc., and recently found diamonds of Melieta, the mammoth copper deposits of Choitzul 3 times bigger than that of neighboring Bougainville, the 2 large nickel deposits of Isabel, the 2 huge titanium oxide deposits of Royal Harbor, Malieta, and a few others, of which were deliberately never mentioned by the dozen-odd Australian government advisors to the Solomon Islands Prime Minister's office over the past 2 years. The advisors to the Prime Minister's office, the people in charge of Treasury, and the Central Bank have all been predominantly Australian government workers for the past 2 years. They calculatingly helped bring the country to its knees. With regards to the Japanese of World War II, there are too many unexplained questions of which, apart from the Guadalcanal giants being in the center of the island, I have extra evidence of something that totally supports my claims. Ask Ezekiel Albua, my down-to-earth friend, about the Japanese War Memorial statue, and I think you will find that he will come up with the same conclusions as I have, and no doubt the Japanese did. If some of the information and my findings within this website is mind-blowing enough for the average Joe Blow around the world, then what I'm about to discuss would spin you off your axis. But it doesn't for many of the Guadalcanal Islanders who knows this to be true, including Ezekiel Abua, some national ministers, Anglican bishops, priests, and the majority of the Guadalcanal residents of the interior of the island. Not to take away from any credibility about the giant races that are discovered within the island, I reluctantly report this. Over the years, I've been receiving astonishing reports from credible people that live in the different sections near the center of the island, Guadalcanal that is. Having a bit of curiosity about these strange reports, I decided to put a little effort into determining what it's all about. Credible people have been telling me that sometimes at dusk, dawn, or during the night, they are seeing dozens of creatures that fly in group formation over the jungle going here and there. They all describe the same thing. As they fly along above the jungle, they see a man-like creature with a long tail and a red glow from upon their back, and a rolling hum from the group as they go over. Many have told me of hundreds of them at a time. They have been seen at dawn randomly flying around above the fog of the valleys of the big mountains of the interior. They have been regularly spotted in large groups going out to sea and coming back at central South Guadalcanal. On occasions, they have been seen individually and in groups in the jungle, and they describe their appearance as such. They look like a strong Homo sapien man with greenish-brown, scaly skin, and they have a long tail, some apparel, and they walk upright. Naturally, these kinds of reports are all very strange to the average person, but to me, they are not that strange anymore. The Japanese War Memorial of the Solomon Islands, located at Mount Austin in Paniera, would have to be the only one of its type in the world. Most war memorials I've come across have something to do with soldiers, guns, dead people, and stuff. Not this one. It's about 30 by 10 meters in area. On the western end, there are 4 large blank vertical marble walls that should have writing on them. And to the north, a row of cherry blossoms that are having a difficult time surviving in a tropical environment. The only writing to be found, which is about the famous Japanese sculpture, is at the base of the bronze statue of a half-human man with scales who is holding a ray gun looking thing attached to the end of its long tail. This very futuristic Star Trek warrior-type reptilian half-human man has a very determined look upon his face while holding his tail-attached ultra-modern ray gun in his right hand and pointing to the west with his left. Surprisingly enough, when I line up to where he's pointing, for some reason he is pointing straight at Mount Dragon Yorpo Waterfall Lake base of northwest Guadalcanal. The less detailed, bullet-ridden statue that is there now was the replacement that the Japanese put there in hindsight just before the Solomon Island tension. As mentioned, ironically enough, in 1999, the Japanese, having approval from the Solomon government, were just about to send a 2,000-strong contingent of the Japanese army into the center of Guadalcanal to do a so-called military exercise, but the Solomon tension put an end to that. Mind you, there's 970 islands in the Solomons that they could have chose from. But look at it now. Howard has sent an equivalent 2,000-strong military contingent to the Solomon Islands to do an expensive $300 million a year occupation, as said, for 10 years to restore law and order, or for whatever reasons of their own. It's my belief that apart from some Japanese soldiers losing their lives from being a free feed for the giants, they more than likely had a few encounters with these warrior half-human lizard types, and when the news got back to Japanese headquarters about what was happening, it was abandon the island and let them have it. That's why there were no Japanese initially to be found when the Allies arrived. It's a difficult subject to briefly discuss here, but I hope you can see the like between the two. Incidentally, the American-led Howard occupiers are in a catch-22 situation, doing the bidding of the other world governments to stop the rest of the world knowing the real truth about Solomon Islands, and hopefully at the same time gaining massive oil reserves of the Solomons like East Timor and some other resources. They are in a no-win situation, at least with the giants. For instance, perish the thought that they think they can just waltz into the jungles of Guadalcanal and take on the giants, as many of them will not come back. It will be similar to the movie Predator, and what the Japanese experienced in World War II, explaining their loss to the relatives of the dead, and to the rest of the media of the world will be interested. As giants can be found on other islands of the Solomons, containing the entire Solomon Islands is impossible, without even considering the known UFO bases of the Solomons, of which their American bosses have been capitalizing on for some time now. If they attempt to contain the entire 1,900-kilometer length of Solomon Islands, they better invade Vanuatu also, as they have giants and little hairy undiscovered hominoids there too. Just ask them. It would be a grave crime against the world if any harm were to come to the giants. It is my sincere hope that one day when this discovery breaks through, that certain sections of the Solomon Islands becomes world heritage, and I lobby the scientists of the world and the international community to make sure that happens. From the borderline, very near Mount Austin and further up the road past the Japanese memorial are 3 Guadalcanal tribes. Simba is one of those tribes, and living that far away from them is an odd couple of retired big giants, a male and a female. Ask any of the tribes up that way and they would tell you about them, as it is common knowledge and they have been numerously seen. I had thought of filming there many times, but I have been the victim of usual circumstances, always preventing this. Joseph is the name of the paramount chief of that area. During the ethnic conflict of the year 2000, many residents fled Hanayara to the jungles behind. These fleeing people spotted these 2 giants on a number of occasions during that time. Actually, a shortcut to get to the area of where they are living is by following the track that leads on over the other side of the creek at the southern end of the botanical gardens behind the Hanayara prison. But gaining permission from Joseph with measured gratuities would be a better idea. Around that area also are a number of ex-giant caves that you can look through and film. One day, these will be archaeological and anthropological sites worth digging up. The area is rich with many folklore stories pertaining to their tumultuous historical relationship with the giants. But so is everywhere else on the island, and for that matter, everywhere else in the Solomon Islands. Virtually every big island in the Solomons has commonly known folklore stories of their giant people. Enough about the Guadalcanal giants for the time being. All the larger islands of the Solomons have giants living in them. But each of these islands people call them different names. Mumu, like the cow noise, is the universal Solomon Islander name for these huge race of giant people. Choitzel, which is a 300 long by 80 kilometer wide island to the western extremities of the Solomons, has just as many giant people living in its interior as Guadalcanal. When you observe the map, you'll notice that there is not one village in the interior, and there's a very good reason for that. Actually, I have sometimes wondered why they were always trying to take each other's island territory back in the headhunting days, and I thought maybe that it had something to do with them always trying to get away from being eaten by these giant people on their own islands. But little did they know that they would have the same problem no matter where they went. Isabel has big giants still living there in 2 different areas, but their population is far fewer than that of Guadalcanal. Central Northeast and Central North are the 2 areas where they can be found on that island, but just ask anyone there and they will steer you in the right direction. Macure, which is east of Guadalcanal, is only the small super strong dwarf-like giants, which I forgot to mention can be found on Guadalcanal too. These are another type of hominoid race that can be found living in Solomon Islands, and they exist not only on these 2 islands, but no doubt on many of our Solomon Islands, and definitely Vanuatu also. In 1996, there was a front page picture of one of these 4-foot Chowa Chowa in the Solomon Star newspaper. He wandered into a village near the Gold Ridge, and so they put a pair of shorts on him and took him to Hanayara to show him off. The picture has him being led handheld down the main street with hundreds of indigenous following. There was another time a similar occurrence happened that was in the newspaper. This was around 1991 when another one of these Chowa Chowa did a similar thing. Another pronunciation is Chocho. The Australian Aborigines speak of a similar little reddish hairy man that they call the Jungar Man. Other cultures around the world have the same. I know of stories where men have seen these little people in the bush and they display the extraordinary ability of being able to jump considerable distances. I'm not particularly that interested in them, but might say that they must live socially somewhere. Peter tells me he knows where they could be found. But one thing at a time. As an example of some Solomon Islanders, Peter's great-grandfather grandfathers and his fathers worshipped the giants, so he knows a far bit about them, like many other Solomon Islanders I know do. Malta has a very rich history with these giant people. It is all too much to put down now, but I'll briefly give you some of my research. The Ramo and Malaita are the same species as the giants of Guadalcanal, but we're, in the Malayitan case, culturally different to that of the Guadalcanal. When you get into understanding the old grassroots customs and cultures of these different islands people, you find that they follow that of the particular island's giant race culture. This is difficult to explain without virtually writing an essay on it. Their folklore stories of prominent giant encounters are different and portray their giants fittingly to their own cultures. For instance, the Malayitan Ramo was known to use a huge subby, which was a long, flat, elongated diamond-shaped club-style weapon. Even though, in my estimation, the last of the Ramo was approximately 600 years ago, and I may be wrong, the Malayitan people still have this weapon, and they can be found as ornaments everywhere on the island. One day, we will find out that this island was once the center of a vast civilization of these giant people that was spread throughout the southwest Pacific as far away as Fiji and possibly further. Of great significance, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is much remnants of these lost civilizations of giant races scattered in different parts of Malta. I say civilizations for a very good reason. Around a mountain near Mount Mala of the North Malta interior is a perfectly fitting large stone block wall path spiraling around the mountain. This path leads to a flat area on top of the mountain, where another large stone block wall separates to a higher split level flat area where an altar can be found. Some 100 meters further on is a burial site that has a perfectly flat, approximately 18 foot by 6 foot by 1 foot stone upon it. The bush people further away from that area say that a Ramo of great importance is buried there. There are also hieroglyphic inscriptions chiseled into these stone block walls. Several years ago, when they were cutting the bush back a little to expose this area more, they also found pottery and other items. The area from where these large stone block stones were quarried is miles down the mountain range on the west coast near the sea. It is too long to explain just how I know all this. Incidentally, the indigenous of this area are quite jealously protective of this site, but that should not be too much of a problem by using monetary gratuities if you wish to visit this place. A helicopter is advisable. I have told people about this place, but like everything else, for one reason or another, nobody believes me. It has been there for a few thousand years already, so I suppose it would still be there a few thousand years more. In Cuello, central East Malta, a place where my wife comes from, they have stone block structures with strange inscriptions upon them deep in the bush. I have seen pictures of this same Ramo giant language in a book written by an Australian Yowie researcher. No doubt Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, and obviously Australia all have the same. In Malta, these sometimes large stone structures with ancient Ramo writing chiseled into them are considered with reverence to those people of the bush nearby or where they are located. For instance, my wife's grandfather, a famous man of Cuello, is buried close to a 4-foot rounded edge Ramo stone block structure with Ramo or giant race writing upon it. By the way, Ramo is a common word used by the Malayitan people to describe anyone with superior warrior characteristics. Another Malayitan meaning for Ramo is man who eats man. Also, for those that follow up on my research, you will find that the names chosen by the Malayitan shipping company for their ships are Ramos 1, Ramos 2, and Ramos 3. There's a reason for that. When you find out some of the Malayitan history is in regards with what they went through with the Ramo of Malta, it is absolutely horrifying and unparalleled anywhere else in the world's history. And that goes for Guadalcanal and the rest of the Solomon Islands. To a great extent, through examining their psychology, this accounts to me for why the individual islands' people overall personalities from the different Solomon Islands, following their own grassroots cultures, related to worshiping their particular island's giant races are different from one another, and it is cause of why they are the way they are today. And nothing dramatic ever seems to faze them. There's an area in Quaria, north of Quail, where there's a large burial kind of cemetery area in the jungle with literally thousands of giant rainbow skeleton bones scattered upon the ground. I do not know whether this was actually a rainbow cemetery or whether the locals a few hundred years ago gathered them there. One village not far away from this area has, as one of the hut's main support staff, a rainbow femur bone that measures nearly 8 feet. They estimated this particular rainbow to have been over 24 feet tall, which doesn't surprise me, as many of their folklore stories support them being that tall. Further on in Guadalcanal, where the giants can still be found, I know that some do get to be this big, although it's generally believed by the Malayan people that their rainbow civilization disappeared several hundred years ago. I have come across evidence that some might still exist in the vast wilderness of their jungle mountains. One day, I'm sure these next discoveries I'm about to mention will be of great interest to naturalists and a variety of scientists. In 2001, Australian scientists found a previously unknown botanical species they called the Walimine pine tree, or something similar, in an isolated gorge of New South Wales, but that's nothing compared to the isolated patch of jungle rainforest that can be found in Quail that is every different kind of jungle plants and trees, and most probably insects. Definitely not found anywhere else in the Solomon Islands, and to our knowledge anywhere else in the world. Not far away from this geographical isolated unique patch of rainforest is a small lake that some of the rainbow civilizations built a perfectly fitting large stone block wall to support its northeastern section. This freshwater lake, although a few days hard trekking from the east coast of Quail, is connected through an underground water table or chasm, making it tidal. Even though in the course of this unique lake's far distance in the jungle mountains from the ocean, it goes up and down with the ocean tide. Because of its isolation throughout evolution, every different kind of strange-looking fish and plants not found elsewhere in the world can be found within. Another interesting part about this strange place is that there is a rainbow giant cave on the western edge, which has a rare species of hibiscus not found growing anywhere else in the Solomon, and most probably the world. Inside that rainbow cave is something very important, but I'll keep that to myself at this time. Expeditionary tip: be careful of the snakes that are in that area. Some more expeditionary advice for those interested in this particular part of Malta, as I happen to be the first white man to marry a woman from this tribal area. Take my advice. The first white man who thinks he can just trek into this area without gaining permission of the chief of Quail Funduga and thinks that he would return safely is mistaken. Apart from once being renowned as the most ferocious headhunters of Malta and culturally unique to the Solomon Islands, their compensatory customary ways, there is another reason for this, in which I suppose I should explain. The paramount chief of Quail, Chief Minor Adney, has a book compiled with a large list of names of his tribespeople that he says were killed in 1927 from the genocide that the Australian government perpetrated upon them for the death of Mr. William R. Bell, the then District Commissioner of Malta. Without going into details of his death, in retaliation, the Australian government sent the HMAS Adelaide with a contingent of constabulary to Singalungu Harbour of Quail, and over a short period of time, in an attempt to systematically eradicate them, mass murdered, raped, poisoned, according to the bereaved paramount chief, a significant number of men, women, and children of their tribe. Overwhelming detailed evidence that this genocide occurred can be found in the book Lightning Meets the West Wind, written by Professor Roger Keesing, 17 years the head of anthropology at the Australian National University. To the Quail people and their compensatory customary ways, because they have not received any compensation for this sad part of Solomon Island Australian history, getting through this area for some white people would have its difficulties. Monetary gratuities would be an advantage though. The giants of Solomon Islands have large island and trap populations in most of the bigger islands of the Solomons, and have existed there for a millennium. For those interested in pursuing this research further, it's my sincere hope that the rest of the world becomes fully aware of the Solomon giants and the long tumultuous history that the Solomon Islanders have endured at the expense of many lives. I have had a long time to consider the ethical impact that this discovery will bring upon mankind, and I can assure you that the monumental advantages gained by far outweigh all. Known UFO bases of the Solomon Islands. To my knowledge, this may be the first time that somebody is telling the rest of the world about subterranean UFO bases he has found. I suppose there's a first time for everything. On the map further up this website is a reference to Mount Dragon UFO base entrance. This is definitely a current UFO base used by aliens. The entrance to this subterranean base is a waterfall lake about 2,500 feet high on the western side of a 5-kilometer long valley and is approximately 8 kilometers from the coast. I spent several months living in a village called Chapuru of Cape Esperance, which is north on the coast from the subterranean terrestrial UFO base. And in this area, the alien activity from this base is seen on a regular basis, meaning like nearly every night. During the time I lived at this village, I began to lose count of these UFO sightings at around 60 times. But I do remember estimating that it would have been around 100 by now. The reason why I eventually called this unnamed mountain UFO base entrance Mount Dragon is because the Guadalcanal people who live in this area call these flying balls of light UFOs dragon snakes. To the people of northwest Guadalcanal, as they have been observing these dragon snakes for well over a century, and most probably much longer, although they fear them because people have been killed, injured, and have gone missing due to them, they generally give them no more of a second thought unless in close proximity, as they can be found flying around in the area nearly every night. As an example of this accepted part of life, about a kilometer east of Chapuru, the village I once lived, the current Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands, Prime Minister Sir Alan Kemakiza's main entrance or main residence is found, and he has seen these UFOs many more times than I have. Ezekiel Albua, a once Prime Minister, the previous Guadalcanal Premier, and Guadalcanal Minister again, also knows of Waterfall Lake UFO base entrance. You can ask anyone from northwest Guadalcanal about their UFOs, and I mean anyone about them, and they will tell you heaps, as they are seen virtually every night and have been for well over a century. That is, if the American-led Australian Solomon Islands government allows tourism to continue in the Solomon Islands and doesn't place restricted no-go zones everywhere. As these sightings did not always become second nature to me after some extensive investigation to find out where these UFOs go when they were not flying around. Over a 6-day period there and back, myself and another Guadalcanal friend made an arduous trip to this UFO base, and from a hidden position in the nearby mountains above it was when we discovered there was more than one UFO dragon snake using this place as one of their residences in the Solomon Islands. This alien base is still there today. Apart from all the people in the area, the best person to confirm this base and its position is Ezekiel Albua. Also, may I say, the current Solomon Islands Prime Minister Sir Alan Kemakiza, who I know, being from Guadalcanal, knows all about the giant races existing on his island, but was unaware of the real reasons why the Australian Prime Minister, after many years, all of a sudden had a change of heart and started offering assistance with military interdiction immediately after he got back from visiting the American president. You cannot tell me that the Americans, British, and the Australians do not know about these UFO bases, because I have overwhelming proof that they do. The current Solomon Islands interdiction by the American-led Australian multinational forces has been named Operation Help 'em Friend No More. Hence, now it's been named Operation Contain 'em and Bring 'em Come Oil and Gas. Incidentally, it was during my adventurous stay at this village that I first began to learn about the giants of Guadalcanal also. On the map above is shown the entrances of the UFO base located in central east coast of Malta that I know of, and the location of the Rainbow Mountain remnants mentioned. The question mark represents, I know there is some kind of a base in that location somewhere too. Although one pin is missing near the left hand arrow, I believe that clusters of pins are all entrances that make up one big UFO base under the island. Contrary to popular belief, NASA, or whomever that mob was, first made contact with the aliens at the subterranean UFO base of Central East Malta in 1961. No doubt, this is one of the ways of how they began to gain what partial secret technology that they have today. Back then, during the height of the Cold War and attempts to gain technology advantages, they blackmailed these particular aliens. This all happened because when the great British geologist Mr. Gopher was doing his first expedition in the area in between 1958 and 1960, he first saw these UFOs and then reported them back to England. In 1961, a white man who claimed himself to be from Nassau came to that part of the island and asked assistance from his wife's relatives to take him to the UFO subterranean base entrances, which they did. Requesting privacy, they left him at the desert coast above the UFO base. This self-claimed Nassau guy, or whoever he was gone a week, during which somehow he made contact with these aliens until he arrived again. When he was asked my wife's relatives once again for further assistance to take him back from where he came, most of the people of Cayo and Carrere know of this Nassau guy happening. In the map above, you will notice the right-hand red pushpin on the east coast with an arrow pointing at it. This is a 50-meter in diameter bottomless circular reef and amongst the surrounding 10-meter deep coral reef, and is a few miles north of Quo Island, which is on the border of Kauai and Quarere tribes, and south of Namoeri of central East Malieta. Single Lango Harbor is slightly further south. Balls of light UFOs can be seen going in and out of that bottomless circular reef virtually every night. My friends like fishing down there at this UFO hole during the daytime because it saves them from going out to the dangers of the ocean. Also, there are a lot of big fish that can be found in the ocean can also be found down there. They have let down over 100 to 200 meters or 100 pounds of line, and it still hasn't hit the bottom. I also think that this hole being made by a huge spaceship that hovered above it and shot a huge laser into the crust of the earth. Maybe the Australian minesweeper currently in the Solomons could go over this UFO hole to determine for all of us how deep it is. That is, if they don't know already. I mean to say, the minesweeper really does belong to the Australian taxpayers because we're paying $300 million a year to contain these momentous world-scattering discoveries instead of putting it into the much in need hospitals, dental, educational services, just to name a few. Maybe they could do this and let us all know what they find out. The left-hand pushpin with the arrow directly inland from that circular reef hole UFO base entrance is about 3/4 of a mile on the mainland of the island. There's a lake of which then the boys are out fishing at night. The UFOs can be seen going in that lake and coming out the circular reef or vice versa. Both entrances are definitely connected. I personally have only seen their activities at the lake in this area. The UFO coming out this lake at dusk incinerated my good friend's grandfather, and everyone in that area knows about it. These aliens, for whatever reason or for whatever name you would like to call them, have installed fear in these people for generations. And many people have gone missing, and I think I know where they are. In Cayo and Quarere area are 3 other entrances in their jungle mountains that I know of, where these balls of light type UFO vehicles can be seen going in and out. It is my belief that all these entrances are not individual bases but are all connected, making up one big base under the island. I may be wrong, but I also believe one of the many reasons why they are there is that for reasons of their own, they have been mining a very rare type of gemstone under this highly mineralized kimberlite base, carrying a multitude of different types of gemstones. The rare gemstones of the aliens' interest that my wife's relatives possess have a far higher specific gravity than that of diamonds, and a refractive index that when you put the stone in sunlight, you see your mirror image deep in the center of the stone. Also, holding them to the sun, they are very deep, transparent, silvery blue. For their size, they are noticeably extremely heavy. I once had one of these ET stones that was 32.4 carats, which had these characteristics. Ironically enough, the more customary people of this island call these particular UFOs diamond snakes. And there are some old folk stories supporting the aliens' interest in these unique gemstones. As there are many remnants of the Rainbow civilization to be found on top of the island, and the aliens underneath for what appears has been a very long time, there is every chance there's a connection between the two, and that goes for Guadalcanal also. I can only speculate about the remote Choitzul, but that wouldn't surprise me in the least, as I know that they also have quite a lot of giants and a lot of UFO traffic over that way too. Nevertheless, if there were ever a place that one could call UFO headquarters, it would have to be in Central East Malta. Mind you, these are only the ones I know of. Goodness knows what other UFO bases are really in the rest of the Solomon Islands. This map is slightly inaccurate in that Afeo, the main town, is located approximately where the T is adjacent to the arrow indicating the alien base entrance. The Waterfall Lake UFO base of South Malta, where I have also witnessed their activities, is easy to find. Just ask the locals, but heading north up the passes with small Malta on your right, about 3 kilometers from Afeo, the main town, and about 1 kilometer up the jungle mountain is their base entrance, where they can be seen nearly every night going in and out of, and also brazenly and casually flying along the passage. I should know, apart from expeditions there, when I would watch them doing this, my first Solomon wife, Miriam, comes from that island. Like all 3 UFO bases mentioned, this base has quite a significant amount of activity, if one would find out by going there, or just simply by asking the locals. That's if anyone ever bothers. Of interest at this base entrance is a very large clump of white crystal formation that can be found growing on the stream's edge further up before the waterfall, of which the lake below is where the balls of light UFOs frequently go in and out. While talking about waterfall lakes and lake entrances and such, a common denominator I found. These aliens in all 3 bases I have mentioned have chosen waterfall lakes or lakes as their base entrances. Apart from the ones that I know of that are in the mountains of Kauai and Poeri, they all have a connection with waterfalls and lakes. This may have been a coincidence when choosing a place to build them, but somehow I doubt it. So when one day those that may follow up on my research in this area are contemplating where else they might find other UFO bases in the Solomons, consider this common denominator. In the June-July issue of Nexus magazine, Sir Ramon June Quintelis II wrote a letter to the editor about could anyone provide information of UFO activity on his island, Makira, which just happens to be an island just below Malaita. Many Solomon Islanders have told me of, as they described them, flat stingray type UFOs with big round lights underneath them that hummed as they went along. They sometimes see them flying low over the jungle and sometimes surfacing out of the sea near where they are fishing. They have landed near villages and they have white or black human people who get out of them having strange gray uniforms on, not seen of anywhere else in the world. You can make your own deductions there about where they're from. With the extraordinary amount of UFO traffic found in the Solomon Islands, it would be hard to imagine with our modern satellite tracking surveillance by a variety of countries around the world that over the past few decades, no one of the modern world has noticed their activities. I know for a fact that a few satellites are above the Solomons. Maybe it would be a good idea to switch a couple of the cameras on and put it on the internet so we too can all watch them getting around, instead of the selected secret few that do. I suppose because there are a couple of multi-million-dollar American spy planes to patrol the Solomon Islands now, they might get lucky. I do not have any evidence that these stingray or triangular-shaped UFO vehicles go to the subterranean terrestrial bases mentioned above when they are not flying around, so I can only presume that they have their own nearby, and if that were the case, then it would be reasonable to think that it was to keep an eye on these balls of light UFOs and their occupants that have been making the Solomon Islands their home for a long time. Where do I think these flat man-made stingray-shaped or triangle-shaped, undiscovered to the rest of the world, unidentified flying objects go when they are not flying around? My educated guess is that these secretive people have built bases either in the side of the remote mountains within the jungle, the question mark on the map, or within the waters of the sea. Furthermore, because of the frustrations that the secretive ones within these governments have had over the decades with the subterranean terrestrials not sharing the majority of their technology for good reason with them, and because of worldwide ethical consequences of stopping millennia of religious wars and huge advantages to further humanity if the rest of the world were to know the truth of the giants and the aliens' existence within the Solomon Islands for the past millennia, it would be logical that their own secret bases are nearby. I hope the information within this website has been helpful for those that are interested in these sorts of things. What you do with it now is up to you. There's a lot more behind the place that time forgot. than what first meets the eye, and there is much that I have not mentioned. It is all too much for just one person to pursue, and I sincerely hope many researchers follow up on these key discoveries. For those who are interested in joining forces and helping further this most important research by firstly supporting us with the necessary financial assistance and whatever else you can, please make contact by either the send mail option below or Solomon Giants at opusnet.com.au, mapsun@bigpond.com.au, or by contacting Duncan Rose of Nexus Magazine, editor at nexusmagazine.com. This website will periodically be updated from time to time with further developments, and please revisit in the near future to obtain a copy of The Giants of Solomon Islands, book soon to be released. Inevitably, the full knowledge and potential of these discoveries being shared with the rest of the world will one day advance the betterment of mankind well into the future. Good luck. Morios Barrion, Research Director, Solomon Anthropological Expedition Trust Board, Incorporated. Giants at thesolomongiants.com. I visited some friends on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean in the mid-1930s. One afternoon, 6 of us decided to hire a car and visit some of the many historical tourist attractions on the island. One of our party suggested that since the weather was very hot, our best bet was to visit some of the caves and underground temples. At least there we could keep cool for a few hours. Some few miles out of Valletta, the capital of Malta, is the little town of Paula. It has only one main street, House of Flini, and on this is the entrance to an underground temple known as the Hypogeum of House of Flini. We stopped here and sought out the guide for a tour of the cave or catacomb of Half-caste. There was a fairly large cave entrance with ancient mural decorations of whorls and wavy lines, diamond patches here and there, also oval patterns, seemingly painted with red ochre. The entrance itself smelt damp and moldy, but inside the cave there was not a trace of mustiness. Joe, the guide, told us there were 3 floors of underground rooms and gave each of us a lighted candle. One by one, we bent down low to walk through a narrow passage which led to a step or two, and again we were able to stand up in a fair-sized room which had been built out of the Malta sandstone eons ago in the Stone Age. Joe told of a powerful oracle or wishing well deep down, and how it had worked wonders in the old days for the initiated who knew the correct sound to use. I think the oracle still works today unless it was damaged. Malta was heavily bombarded during World War II. The oracle was supposed to work only if a male voice called to it, but as the guide was saying this, I slipped down a small step and gave a yell that was picked up by something and magnified throughout the whole cave.
Tombs, certainly, but also ritual spaces that mirror the above-ground shrines. Living people were using these spaces. Low sound echoing back and amplifying itself can do very strange things, changing tone and volume almost as if it were a living thing. The resonance can actually be felt in various parts of the body. Some people find this is unnerving, disconcerting. For others, it's quite thrilling, much like the effect that we find people creating with subwoofers in their cars. Closed in a stone chamber, a constant tone created by a voice or musical instrument like a shell horn or drum would bounce or echo between the walls, seeming to come from all directions. If it were the right pitch or note, with the sound vibrating at exactly the right frequency, it would also create something called a standing wave. It must have been magical to hear these noises coming from the stone itself, as if it were the earth speaking, or perhaps the voices of the ancestors. Even today, it creates an atmosphere that is ripe for meditation, autosuggestion, or hypnosis.
There's a natural desire of people to have altered states of consciousness. People were able to find and access these altered states through the acoustic properties of these megalithic structures.
We followed the guide through some more narrow passages which led down, 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 then straightened our backs again when we came into another room. In this large opening was a circular stone table or altar in the center of the room. Cut out of the rock walls around were layers of stone beds or resting places of some kind, with hollows scooped out for the head, body, and narrowing to the feet. I guess there were places for adults about 4 feet tall, with smaller scooped out beds. It looked like mother, father, and child either slept or were buried here, although we saw no bodies here. Down, down, down again, stooping and crawling through a narrow passage into another large room, with slits or narrow openings in the stone wall. They buried their dead here, said the guide. I peered through a slit and saw skeletons. Through another slit I peered into a cave where the guide said they kept their prisoners. A 3-foot thick stone door about 4 feet high and 4 feet wide guarded the entrance. What kind of people and how strong were these pygmies to be able to carve out these rooms to a definite pattern and to move doors this thick and heavy, I thought. This is the end of the tour, Joe, the guide said. We must now turn and retrace our steps. What's down there? I asked. Before turning, I noticed another opening off one of the walls. Go there at your own risk, he replied, and you won't go far. I was all for more exploring and talking it over with my friends. 3 of them decided to go with me, and 2 waited with the guide. I was wearing a long sash around my dress, and since I decided to lead the group, I asked the next one behind me to hold on to it. Holding our half-burnt candles, the 4 of us ducked into this passage, which was narrower and lower than the others. Groping and laughing our way along, I came out first onto a ledge pathway about 2 feet wide with a sheer drop-off of about 50 feet or more on my right and a wall on my left. I took a step forward, close to the rock wall side. The person behind me, still holding on to my sash, had not yet emerged from the passage. Thinking it was quite a drop, and perhaps I should go no further without the guide, I held up my candle. There, across the cave, from an opening deep below me, emerged 20 persons of giant stature. In single file, they walked along a narrow ledge. Their height I judged to be about 20 or 25 feet, since their heads came about halfway up the opposite wall. They walked very slowly, taking long strides. Then they all stopped, turned, and raised their heads in my direction. All simultaneously raised their arms, and with their hands beckoned me. The movement was something like snatching or feeling for something, as the palms of their hands were face down. Terror rooted me to the spot. "Go on, we're all getting stuck in the passage." My friend jerked at my sash. "What's the matter?" "Well, there's nothing much to see," I stammered, taking another step forward. My candle was in my right hand. I put my left hand on the wall to steady me, and stopped again. My hand wasn't on cold rock, but on something soft and wet. As it moved, a strong gust of wind came from nowhere and blew out my candle. Now I was really scared in the darkness. "Go back!" I yelled to the others. "Go back! Guide me back by my sash." My candle was gone out and I cannot see. In utter panic, I backed into the narrow little passageway and forced the others back until we had backed into the large room where Joe and my friends were waiting. What a relief that was. "Well, did you see anything?" asked one of them. "No," I quickly replied. "There was a draft in there that blew out my candle." "Let's go," said Joe, the guide. I looked up at him. Our eyes met, and I knew at that one moment in time he had seen what I had seen. There was an expression of caution in his eyes, adding to my reluctance to tell anyone. I decided not to. Out in the open again, and in the hot Malta sunshine, we thanked the guide, and as we tipped him, he looked at me. "If you are really interested in exploring further, it would be wise to join a group. There's a school teacher who is going to take a party exploring soon," he said. I left my address with him and asked him to have the school teacher get in touch with me, but I never heard any more about it until one of my friends called me to read an item from the Valletta paper. "I say, Lois, remember that tunnel you wanted to explore? It says here in the paper that a schoolmaster and 30 students went exploring, and apparently they got as far as we did. They were roped together and the end of the rope was tied to the opening of the cave. As the last student turned the corner, where your candle blew out, the rope was cut clean, and none of the party was found because the walls caved in." The shock of this information didn't change my determination not to say anything about my experience in the Half-caste. But several months later, my sister visited Malta and insisted on making a tour of the underground temple on House of Fleeny. Reluctantly, I went along, retracing the same route, but there was a different guide this time. When we got down to the lowest level, the room where I had taken off to explore the tunnel, the entrance was boarded up. "Wasn't it here that the schoolmaster and the 30 students got trapped?" I asked the guide. "Perhaps," he replied with a non-committal shrug of his shoulders and refused to say anything more. "You cannot get a thing out of these Maltese when they don't want to talk." "You are new here, aren't you?" I asked him. "Where's Joe, the guy who was here a couple of months ago?" "I don't know any Joe," he shook his head. "I alone have been showing people around these catacombs for years." "Who was this guy, and why did Joe disappear after we left House of Fleeny that first time? And why is it impossible to get any facts on the disappearing school children?" 1960, Louise Becker, New York SIB treasurer, visited Malta during her European trip. She searched old newspaper files and a museum, trying to get some facts to substantiate my story, but in vain. The Maltese are tight-lipped about the secrets of their island. Your editor's third lecture, Flying Saucers and America's Destiny, contains brief references to the cavern world and the interior of the earth. And it was after hearing this talk to her New York saucer group that Miss Jessup told Mrs. Crabb and me the Malta experience described above. We spent 2 days with Lois Jessup during our Eastern trip in April 1960 and found her a charming hostess, cosmopolitan as a much-traveled Englishwoman can be, and a student of the borderland. Lois has a level head, level-eyed way of looking at life and people, which is very refreshing. Nevertheless, I found her Malta story difficult to believe until Mrs. Crabb and I returned home and I had a chance to look up Malta at the San Diego Library. 2 Malta articles in the National Geographic are especially fruitful for the underground researcher. Griffith's Malta Halting Place of Nations, May 1920, and Walter's Wanderers a Will in Malta, August 1940, pages 267-272. Walters and another young American friend made a leisurely bicycle tour of Malta in 1939, with plenty of time to get acquainted and to ride around with island teenagers. They visited House of Fleeny too, and proved the startling amplifying power of the Oracle. They also picked up this sad information from their Maltese friend. Years ago, one could walk underground from one end of Malta to the other, but all entrances were closed by the government because of a tragedy. On a sightseeing trip comparable to a nature study tour in our own schools, a number of elementary children and their teachers descended into the tunnel maze and did not return. For weeks, mothers declared that they heard wailing and screaming from underground, but numerous excavations and searching parties brought no trace of the lost souls. After 3 weeks, they were finally given up for dead. Griffith noted a hollow-sounding floor in one of the rooms of House of Fleeny, indicating yet unexplored lower levels. He also gives a few facts which back up Richard Schaefer's contention that the Dirus, the evil cavern dwellers, are cannibals and enjoy eating human flesh. House of Fleeny was discovered in 1902, but before the Valletta Museum director could open it up for the tourists, dirt, broken pottery, and enough normal-sized human bones to account for 33,000 people had to be removed from the rooms of the Hypogeum. Archaeologists and other innocents believe that the catacombs, like House of Fleeny, were burial tombs. I rather think it was a cavern restaurant for the degenerate, undersized descendants of the Atlanteans who were forced into the caves thousands of years ago. Here is Griffith's description of the oracle in the cave. At about the level of a man's mouth is a hemispherical hole in the wall about 2 feet in diameter. Here it was noticed only a few months ago that any word spoken into this place was magnified 100-fold and audible throughout the entire structure. A curved projection is especially carved out of the back of the cave near this hole and acts as a sounding board, showing that the designers had a good knowledge of sound wave motion. The impression upon the credulous can be imagined when the oracle spoke and the words came thundering forth through the dark and mysterious places with terrifying impressiveness. Giants in the earth. Lois Jessup was reminded of the peculiar appearance of the 20-foot giants she saw in House of Fleeny by a couple of 35mm slide illustrations in my number 4 salsa lecture concerned with mediumship. These slides are copies of Max Heindel's drawings of the human aura from his book Cosmo-Conception, curved lines radiating out beyond the body. Of the huge cavern dwellers she saw, she said their coverings seemed to be like long white hair, combed downward and shaggy looking. Their heads were oval and elongated at the chin and top, and their hair on their heads fell about their shoulders like a draped monk's coil. Now these underground beings, whatever their origin, have no resemblance to shapeless Dirus. At least we have the fact of their existence, and in this experience of Lois Jessup's and in the House of Fleeny material in National Geographic's, we do have some of the best factual support of the Schaefer mystery your editor has yet seen. In fact, it was this material which encouraged me to go ahead and put together talk number 5, The Reality of the Underground, including a portion of Mrs. Jessup's experience and a review of Schaefer's basic theories as spelled out by Ray Palmer in the early Mystic magazines back in 1954 and 1955. My basic premise is that there are many different races in the interior of the Earth, of all shapes, sizes, and colors, and of different degrees of density, depending on what level of plane or vibration is normal to them. Along with our former director, Meade Lane, I believe that some of these underground races can shift back and forth across the border between 3D and 4D, so that sometimes they are visible to normal human sight and at other times they are invisible to our great bewilderment. What say the Probert controls? The subject of the interior of the Earth and the Dirus came up a few times at the early Mark Probert seances in San Diego. Here is what one member of the inner circle, Raja Nachash, had to say about it. August 16, 1950. The interior of your Earth is largely hollow. If it became solid, in that moment, what you call your force of gravity would be instantly raised many hundreds of times. You would be mashed to the Earth, nor is the Earth a great mass of fire inside. There are, under the Earth, places where one can live comfortably, and indeed, where he will be relieved of many of his ills. No, he will not find total darkness, for at certain depths there is light, a diffused glow, from rocks and plant life, a kind of phosphorescent light. Do you know where your Christian story of the devil comes from? Many centuries ago, when Atlantis went down, many of her people fled into the caves. They stayed down there for many generations, and now their skin did not turn red like your pictures of the old boy, but rather an extreme white and tones of green. This was brought about by the lack of ultraviolet rays of the sun, and the green was due to absorption from minerals below the surface. From time to time, these individuals came to the surface. Some unintentionally came on a surface opening and were seen by the superstitious people of certain sections. And being so different in appearance, you can imagine the fright this created in those who saw them. Most of their hair on the body had completely disappeared. Their eyes had grown smaller due to the lack of light and of vitamins from sun-grown vegetables. That which I was speaking of was the origin of your Diru. Some of those who went underground morally degenerated, and with more degeneration went physical degeneration. That always follows, doesn't it? Some of them are quite like your Australian Bushmen. There are some races that are quite out of fashion and have been extinct for many thousands of years. You should try to meet some of your fond ancestors. They will look quite badly in a tuxedo or formal evening dress. Cavern comment by the Yada D. Shiite. In March 1953, Meade Lane had finished reading Robert Ernest Dickoff's little 125-page book, Agrathar, available then from Dickoff for $2.50, 315 East 107th Street, New York 29. Dickoff wrote knowingly of the Tasha Lama and its underground city of Agrathar, of the great tunnel system drilled through Earth by a race of pre-glacial Martians, of the evil serpent race who walked on 2 feet, erect as humans, and of Rainbow City in the Antarctic. After reading this mishmash of occult lore, Meade went to his fount of all wisdom, the inner circle, for comment and received this surprising reply from the Yada. It is true that the serpent race once overran this planet and that they came from Venus. They abandoned it because conditions here were not favorable to them. They were of a great size and had scaly bodies and large frog eyes and were advanced mentally. Morally, they were not evolved, but were extremely cruel and vicious. They are still to be found in the interior of Venus. The Venetians of present day, however, are not descendants of this earlier type. Venetians visiting your Earth at present want to bring peace. They have no desire to occupy Earth. Most of what Dr. Dickoff says about the tunneling system is correct. These were constructed by Atlanteans, partly for communication, sometimes in connection with the search for metals or ores. The tunnels themselves were not primarily designed for underground living, but in many cases they led into vast caverns, natural and artificially hollowed out, where a great number of persons spent all their lives. It is true that the tunnel opening under the pyramid at Giza leads into the caverns under Tibet. As to size, a common diameter of these tunnels was about 150 feet. They were constructed by mechanical or chemical means, that is, by the application of superheat deteriorators. It was like burning their way through Earth. Yes, it resembled the heat of the atomic bomb. If such heat could be controlled and directed, it was a very dangerous process, for if the heat blast went out of control, the whole globe might suffer most serious consequences. The process was very rapid. The molecules disintegrated. The substance of the Earth is very porous and the gases were largely absorbed by it. Tibetan Lama Lhasa and Roman Catholic Rome. In some quarters, much is still known about these tunnels. The two great religious hierarchies of your plane have such knowledge and in fact have stored great supplies of food in underground depots. They are aware of the approach of their twilight hour. Here you have a prophecy by the Yada, which had already come true for the corrupt, organized priesthood of Lhasa and Agrata. Their surface organization has been shattered by the Chinese communists, though it is difficult to believe that the wily old Tasha Lama has been smoked out of his underground lair, Agrata. The catacombs beneath the Vatican in Rome are certainly no secret, but the Yada hint that these connect with the cavern world may be something of a surprise. The church has had a stranglehold on Malta for hundreds of years, with dozens of churches and cathedrals on the little 12-mile island, and at least one male member of every family in the priesthood. The one God of the world of matter is the God of change, concluded Yada. All things move into and out of manifestation in the three dimensions. Where this form come from, mind built it and will change it according to the need for change. The object lost in the three dimension still holds form on another plane. To know this and know that we know it is to escape much sorrow when forms of cherished things, beloved persons, vanish from the world of our sense perceptions. March 10, 19